Hi everybody, my name is Dr. Matthew Rogers Draycott and I am here for another video in our Starting a Business short course. And in this video we are exploring market validation, and this is all about sizing your market, understanding how big it is and really trying to enumerate that, to put some figures and statistics behind it so that when you're presenting it to people you can talk really cogently about how big the market is and most importantly, kind of why it is as big as it is. So, without further ado, let's get started and hop straight in. So, when we look at market validation, we're really looking at this as a picture. We want to look at what are the models for estimating market variables. We want to look at some sources of data, practice doing it, and then you can go off yourselves, have a go, and discuss some of your estimations. So, let's jump straight in. Oh, before we do that though, why is this important? Well, in the context of pitching and presenting a business, this whole area is really important because fundamentally it defines what we're doing, right? If you want to talk about a market or how to approach it or how big a business is, this is how you do it. So it's a really key area because when it comes to pitching for finance or anything like that, this is exactly the skill set you need. So let's go for it. Let's get started. It's useful first to understand kind of how we divide down a market. And there are three elements that we utilize when we're talking about market: TAM, SAM, and SOM. The way I like to think about these is in terms of the gradients of a market that we're eventually going to market to or sell to. So TAM is our total addressable market. That's the entire market that you might market to. Now, the challenge with that is you're not going to be able to market to them. It's just too big. But it's the biggest possible market who might want to buy into you. The service addressable market is the portion of the TAM you might actually be able to reach. Now, reach is the important point there. By reach, we mean market to, not sell to. The element of the market you can really sell to is the SOM, and that's sometimes called the share of market, sometimes called the service obtainable market. This is the area we're actually targeting. Now, this is constrained by your ability to produce, fundamentally, or deliver. So either with a product or service, we can only do that. We've got constraints with which we can, within blah, 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 teeth back in, within which we can do that. So if we can't operate within those constraints, this whole thing kind of falls apart. So for the SOM, for that share of market, we're looking at estimating what our own productive capacity is to get to a number. Okay, so when you think about it this way, total addressable market, possible market we could actually sell to. Service addressable market, the market we're likely to market to. Share of market, the market we're going to probably sell to. Now, we probably won't capture all of that share of market even, but some of that is obviously good enough to get us going. And that's what's really important here. That's what we're really trying to communicate to people and talk to people about. So, there are some problems here though, and of these, the common problems, and they are common, the most common is this. And this is a logical argument. So let me walk you through this for a second. Somebody comes into a business pitch or presentation and says, hey Matt, I only need 1% of Chinese 15 to 19-year-olds to be successful. And I go, well, okay, cool. China's current population about 1.5 billion. 18 to 9-year-olds account for about 82 million. So 1% of that market is huge. It's just not marketable to. Now, you might say, incorrect. I would say that's what we call the 1% fallacy. And this happens very commonly. People walk into business pitches and presentations, say, I need 1% of this market to be successful. It just doesn't work. So we want to be better than that. We want to have better stats, ideas, enumerations than this. This is really one of the key points I'm driving at here. Second, the size of your problem is not the size of your market. What do I mean by this? Well, common example here. A couple of guys rock up to a pitch and they're talking about pitching a cup holder. Now, what they've done though is look at the number of cars on the road that cup holder will fit, and they've based their number on that number of cars on the road. Challenge there being, cars don't buy cup holders, people buy cup holders. Ergo, we have a logical mismatch. So what we want to try and do is look at this again and go, okay, well, what does this actually mean? Now, what you've got to work out is where your problem lies. Our problem lies with people, not cars. So what we need to understand is the number of people who drive that particular car who would then put the cup holder into the car. That's what we're looking for. That's really important. So don't just work off a number. Try and work out what that number really needs to represent and then base your work on that. Market scale, this is also a really kind of typical challenge or problem. People will come in and go, the cost of diabetes in the NHS, 1.5 million, 10% of total NHS budget, right? 25 grand every minute is spent on diabetes care in the UK. If we can get a percentage of that, imagine what we can do. But you can't, or you can't really put it in that context because it's such a big thing to deal with. You can't deal with all of diabetes. What element of that could you deal with and then base your numbering on that? This is a great headline figure to capture interest, but it doesn't mean anything to anybody who is statistically educated. You're going to look at somebody's going to look at that and go, yeah, okay, the NHS does spend that much, but most of that is going on drugs, operations, etc. Stuff you're not doing, so that's really not valid for you as a business. And then don't use somebody else's market size. This is another common one. Somebody will come in and go, well, their market's this big, so my market will also be this big. No, it won't. Their market is this big for lots of reasons. You need to get to that size if you're going to have a market that works in that way. Otherwise, your plan doesn't work. So you've really got to look at that and kind of go, what does that mean? Right, so don't use somebody else's market size, work it out for yourself. So how do we do that? Let's have that conversation. Two routes, top down, bottom up. Okay, when we're looking at a top down route, what we're trying to do is take a big number and reduce it. So that's often how we get to the TAM and the SAM. When we're working bottom up, this is often how we get to the SOM. And there's reasons for that, because we need to, in one case, we're trying to look at the market size, in the other case, we're trying to look at our productive capacity. So that's how we're trying to get to these numbers. So for top-down estimation, what we're going to start with is the biggest number, reduce it by a factor, and keep going. Now, I'm going to show you an example in a second of me doing this, excuse me. And we're going to use a t-shirt printing business, because something I understand well, and it's an easy thing to wrap your head around. So what we're going to do is try and do this top-down estimation for a t-shirt printing business and see where that gets us to. So let's start. First of all, I'm going to base this in the UK, and the UK population in 2019 was about 66.7 million people. Now, all those people not going to be the customer for that t-shirt. So let's try and narrow this down a bit more. Well, I reckon 15 to 29-year-olds are likely where I'm going to sell the majority of these t-shirts. So there's about 12 million 15 to 29-year-olds in the UK. Still, a lot of people, far more than I can produce for t-shirts. But that means that 15 to 29-year-olds represent about 18% of the UK population. And this is where that stat is important, that 18%. We're going to come back to that, but hold that in your mind. Birmingham, the city in which I live, has a population of about 1.1 million people. So that means there are roughly 198,000 15 to 29-year-olds in Birmingham. 18%, that's how we get there. Now, I also think that blokes are probably my main market here. 49% of the UK population is male. So that means in Birmingham, there are 97,000-ish 15 to 29-year-old males who are probably likely to buy these t-shirts. So if you think about what that means, well, that initial area, that's likely to be my TAM, my total market. Because potentially anybody in the UK could buy these, especially if I put the business online, right? So 12 million, 18% of 12 million, that might be my actual total market that I'm really aiming at. My SAM, the market I probably really want to market to though initially, is going to be that 97,000 males in Birmingham. And I'm going to really target them quite directly, because if I can capture a group of them, then I have a way to start my business and get it moving. So that also kind of links into that whole notion of TAM and SAM, and where are you looking for them in your figure stats? when we're looking for the service addressable market, we're looking for probably the smaller market overall of all the markets we've explored. And I could put a value behind that and work out what that means as a price per t-shirt or as a value of the whole market based on the cost per t-shirt. But for now, I just want to look at it this way with you. So that's taking a big number and using other publicly available bits of data to get to something more sensible. Now, bottom-up estimation. This is where we're trying to work out what we can actually do. Now, it might be us as individuals and people, or it might be another supplier or another producer or a fulfillment center or some piece of technology that we're using. It could be any of those. But the key here is that we work out what that's capable of doing in delivering, and that will give us our SOM, our obtainable or serviceable market. So I'm going to do this as if I were doing it myself. So I know that trained staff can print a certain number of t-shirts per day. But it's only going to be me to start with. So I also need to run everything else that we do, right? Now that means I can't do everything per day. So I'm going to work on the basis that I can probably print about 50 shirts per day. There are 261 working days in the year. So that's 13,050 t-shirts per annum. Now I know that half of consumers purchase 1 to 20 items of clothing per year, and that 22% of closed purchases are likely t-shirts. So people on average are buying about 2 t-shirts a year. Now, if we factor that in based on what we already know, that's about 6,525 sales per annum, or about 7% of the 15 to 29-year-old male market in Birmingham that we could actually cover based on my potential production run of 13,000. So roughly speaking, I might only sell about half of the t-shirts that I produce, but that's still 7% of the market. Now, we wouldn't want that to be the case, because if I'm producing 13,000 and only selling 6,000, there's a big gap there. But that's getting towards a number that is realistic in the context of what people will likely buy. Okay, so it's likely that if I produce 13,000 shirts, there's probably a market for about 6,500 of those. Actually, so what that tells me potentially is I'd probably only produce 6,500 of those shirts. I wouldn't make all 13,000, or I'd make slightly more, and I'd aim to capture that market initially first, because that market is probably the most feasible, and it's going to save me money in not overbuying and over purchasing. So I might even use that as my baseline for ink that I buy, stock that I buy, etc. And that is my SOM. That's the market I think I can actually make stuff for. That's really important. So now we know the market we can market to, which is probably 200,000 people, but actually the market I can potentially sell to, much, much smaller initially, because I can't produce that much quantity. I could do maybe double that. I could get to maybe 14%, but actually, is that likely to happen? It's going to be difficult because of how many t-shirts and how many items of clothing people buy. Now, this is all about scope and context. It might be that your market's bigger or smaller. It might be that your market's broader or shorter. The key thing here is you're not there to answer all of that. You're there to try and judge it as best you can based on the information that you have. And wherever possible, show your working, show how you're arriving at these figures and how you're understanding them in your context. Now, what does this mean in terms of market value, that broader kind of conversation of potential? Well, if we know the SAM and we can times it by the sale price, we can work out what the overall market potential is. So, we know there are 97,000 male 15 to 29-year-olds in Birmingham. I'm going to charge £20 a shirt. That's about 1.9 million as a potential market valuation. 7% of that, about £132,000. So if I'm working conservatively, I might be able to get £132,000 in year one of a market valuation of around 2 million. That gives me a lot more market to go into. I know I can produce more. I can produce double the amount of t-shirts potentially. So I could easily make maybe 260,000. And I know my market can tolerate that because my market is at a 2 million valuation. So actually, this isn't a bad place to be in terms of the scale and scope for my development and what I would like to do. Now, what about market growth potential? This is really hard to calculate unless we can find secondary data that shows how the market's going to grow. So it's very hard to do in a logical way. So for this one, I could base it, say, on birth rates, and I could look at what's coming every year and how that's going to build. But I'm not going to have to do an awful lot better than that. It's going to be very rough numbers here. So that's the sort of thing that we're working on. Okay? And that's what I want you to really be kind of word of warning there, that when it comes to growth, growth is always down the line and it's never perfect. Customer lifetime value, or CLTV. CLTV is important because it talks about the total revenue we might generate from somebody. So for instance, if somebody buys 2 t-shirts per year and I keep them as a customer, over time they're buying lots of t-shirts from me, and that's quite valuable. It's always easier to work with existing customers than develop new ones, no matter what market you're in, no matter what you do. So CLTV is actually quite an important number for us to work with here. Okay? And I always want you to come back to that, because I don't want to be acquiring new people all the time, or even when I am, I need to retain the ones I have acquired so I can keep generating revenue from them. So how do we get to CLTV? Well, we calculate the average purchase value, we calculate the frequency rate, we calculate the customer value. So, and the average customer lifespan. And that lets us get to our CLTV. So let's put that into context here. Our average purchase value, 20 quid. Our average purchase frequency rate is 2. So our customer value is 2 times 20, which equals 40. Our customer lifespan is about 5 years. So if I retain a customer for 5 years, they're worth £200 to me. Excuse me. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but that is a customer that I probably don't have to market as hard and spend as much to get. So I'm actually earning more of that £200 than I would be otherwise. And that is ideal for us as a business. That's exactly what we want. Customer acquisition cost and cost per acquisition, very hard again to calculate. Very much depends on your business and your marketing funnel. And as we're not talking about marketing and how much all that costs right now, I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail. Suffice to say, that's really what this hinges on. Understanding how much it costs to get a new customer very much relies on you understanding how much your costs of marketing are, and then you base it around there. And that's the sort of figure base for doing that, but I'm not going to get into that now because, again, slightly off topic from where we are and what we've been focusing on. And there's some references here for the data I use to underpin this presentation. I hope that's been useful for you all. I hope that gives you an idea of how to build and enumerate your markets, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Take care.